Hadith. It may not be what you think. This is from Sunan an-Nasai, number 3479. A man from Banu Fazarah came to the Prophet and said, "My wife has given birth to a black boy," and he wanted to disown him. He said, he meaning Muhammad said, "Do you have camels?" And the other man said, "Yes." He said, "What color are they?" He said, "Red." He said, "Are there any gray ones among them?" And he said, "There are some gray camels among them." And he said, "Why is that, do you think?" And he said, "Well, perhaps it is hereditary." So Muhammad said, "Perhaps this is hereditary," and he did not permit him to disown this boy. One thing about looking at old documents, the Hadith traditions being 1400 years old, that's pretty dang old. And one thing that's really fun about this can be when you see some kind of accidental scientific insight, meaning something that could be proven scientifically in the future, but was basically at the time just an ancient hunch based on observation and maybe logic and common sense. Now, I've probably said this before, but it's important. The ancients were way smarter than we tend to give them credit for. In fact, I'm starting to think it's quite probable that they were actually smarter than us. They did not have the software upgrades that we do, but as far as hardware, it was pretty solid and maybe even superior to what we have now. And this hadith is a case in point. Muhammad never took classes in statistics. He did not understand probability in the way a modern person does. And he certainly had no idea how genetics worked. I mean, these people didn't even understand germs, let alone the blueprint for human life. And yet, here is an ancient man, armed only with observation, logic, and most importantly, mercy, and he comes to the exact same conclusion that modern science would have, probably. If you have a baby that is darker or lighter than either of the parents, now yes, there might be a reason to be suspicious. It might be exactly what it looks like. But, on the other hand, there is the statistical concept of outliers. The genetic lottery just may have come up snake eyes. It happens. The 1 in a million shot is 1 in a million. Not 1 in never, 1 in a million. It happens. Now, you've probably seen this in your personal life. You may have a family member who is an outlier, or you may know someone who has a family member who is an outlier in terms of just physical appearance, skin color, height, weight, things like that. Now, why do I look exactly like my sister and nothing like my brother? It happens. And we have genetic tests that prove it happens. The same parents can have wildly different children. I've seen it. Now, not always, but it happens. And it's not just humans. Anyone who observes the animal kingdom can see this. Have you ever bred gerbils, for example? Their kids come out in all the colors of a Munchkins box from Dunkin' Donuts. It happens. It's very hard to predict. And you don't need advanced genetics to see that either. You just use Muhammad's formula here. Observation plus logic plus mercy. So those are the steps in Muhammad's thinking here. Observation. I've seen camels my whole life, and they come out in all sorts of colors. And human physiology, in many ways, it does seem to imitate animal physiology. Now, that's part one. I'm seeing random variations everywhere. And then, logic. If this applies to camels, there is a very good chance the same thing happens in humans. Human babies seem to have the same mixed qualities as camel babies. That's part two. This parallel is probable. And then comes the most crucial ingredient here. Part three, mercy. Now, mercy, because this is possibly, maybe even probably, a random occurrence. It's not something that can be used as grounds to break up a family or to accuse someone of adultery. In some ways, this is a hint from the ancient world at what we would later call reasonable doubt. In an American court, at least in criminal matters that can result in prison, simply saying, "I think it happened," is just not good enough. Not even close. If the state wants to actually send someone to prison, they have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Not a suspicion, not even a high likelihood, beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, this system includes humans, so it's not always applied perfectly. There have been many high-profile cases where the jury was just too scared to apply this, or many low-profile cases where the jury was just too lazy to apply this, or a judge who didn't care enough to instruct them correctly on any of it. But it's the ideal in America. It's better to let 100 guilty people go free than to send one innocent person to prison. It breeds confidence in the system. It makes people buy in to the legitimacy of the government or the judicial process. And you see a similar thing here. In this case, it's a presumption of innocence on behalf of the family, solidifying the legitimacy of the family in a similar way, regardless of what the child might actually look like. If perhaps it is hereditary, then it is hereditary. Mere suspicion is not enough to justify all the collateral damage that would come from a claim of illegitimacy. So, the family stays intact, with no genetic testing necessary. Thank you, and I'll talk to you next time. Inshallah.